Welcome everybody. Good morning. My name is Pau Guardiola. I'm a PhD candidate at Stanford University and UCAM, Katholieke University of Murcia. And the field of my research is about generative AI and spatial computing applied to education. I am also dad of 3 kids that they absolutely broke my morning, so it was very hard for me to be here, but I was definitely looking forward to come to Universidad de Alicante because, first of all, I'm from here. I was born in Alicante, I live in Novelda, and now I'm doing my research at Stanford and in Murcia, but Alicante is in my heart, so I was so into coming here. I thank Aureli also for the invitation and the whole university. And of course, 3 kids, 4 years old, 2 years old. I know that the future for them will be very into the metaverse, so I'm very looking forward to a more responsible development. So, today we will have I will be the chair of the session. I will give each presenter, each researcher 7 minutes, 7.0. So I will, because I think I already read all of the topics and I think they are very interesting. After the presentations, we will open also for the discussions. We have 2 of them over here with us, that they will give us some thoughts about the research. And then after that, we will open for everybody here in the room to ask any questions. So we will start with our first presenter, Emmie HINE, who's over here on my left. Emmie is a PhD candidate at University of Bologna and KU Leuven, and he will start with her paper titled Assembly of an Expression in Extended Reality, Transposing Fundamental Rights Across Realities. Emmie, there you are. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And I was told we had 7 to 10 minutes, so I will try and be very fast because I was definitely on the upper end of that. But thank you for that introduction, and it's wonderful to be here with you all today. So, as Pau said, I'll be talking about assembly and expression in extended reality, and more than that, sort of the idea of how we translate fundamental rights from the physical world into virtual environments. So, I hope it's not controversial to say that as we use extended reality technologies more, there's a correspondingly greater need to analyze their impact. And the same in extended reality, which in this paper we use the term immersive extended reality to mean VR technologies and AR technologies that mediate your whole visual field. The presence, immersion, and interactivity that they provide combined creates a sense of realism that results in new, different, and better experiences and new ways to experience and exercise fundamental rights. Think about how even social media platforms are platforms for speech. But then, because of that realism and the mediation of platforms and technologies, there's a greater impact if those rights are restricted or violated. Just think about the reports we've heard of harassment in VR worlds compared to harassment on, say, Twitter, which is also bad and should be prevented, but isn't as visceral and traumatic. And so businesses are obligated to uphold fundamental rights under the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, but we don't really have a framework for considering fundamental rights in immersive environments. And so with the question of how do we think about assembly and expression in immersive environments, and then broadly, how do we help guide the protection of those rights in immersive environments is what guided this work. So I'll run through briefly some of the risks and potential benefits of XR for freedom of assembly. And so the UDHR, the key here is peaceful assembly. And that's not to say that every single assembly is protected. Jurisdictions often restrict assemblies for various reasons, usually along the lines of time, place, and manner. So to protect the sanctity of specific days or places, uphold public order, or suppress dissent. And some of the benefits of XR for assembly is that it helps overcome some of those physical world restrictions. The sanctity of a holiday or a physical space doesn't matter as much in XR. And you can also leverage the affordances of the technology to enhance your assembly. So you can craft a virtual environment to facilitate and enhance your message. You can also use AR to enhance a physical assembly by projecting your message and organizing and things like that. At the same time, just as governments, just as less liberal governments tend to restrict assembly for potentially arbitrary reasons, so too could platforms, and it's a big, weighty responsibility to put on platforms. There's also jurisdiction legitimacy questions for both platforms and governments. And then one interesting thing that we get into is the idea of the devaluation of protest as a method of assembly, because if you think about how we're sending avatars to attend meetings for us, and if the same thing starts happening with, say, virtual protests, then is it just becoming a new form of clicktivism? That's something that we don't really know the answer to yet. And then there's also questions of privacy. So protesters often want to be anonymous, and in a virtual setting, your avatar could be linked to your account, could be linked to your physical identity if proper privacy protections aren't in place. And in the physical world, if, say, police officers are equipped with facial recognition AR devices, then that really sort of destroys the privacy of protesters, and that's such a concern that the EU AI Act has banned live biometric recognition, but many other jurisdictions lack those protections. And so now I'll move on to expression, and I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities for expression in XR, and the key is to hold opinions without interference, to freedom of expression through any media and regardless of frontiers, which is a really interesting clause that I think doesn't get discussed enough, but definitely extends this right to XR. And I'll run through a few different types of expression that we categorize, and I think there's really interesting opportunities in XR, providing new modalities for commercial expression, new ways to advertise, political expression, new ways to campaign, and what we kind of lump in as other, so like artistic and self-expression, so new ways to have concerts and art shows. But then again, there's the risk of, what kind of expression are platforms allowing, because that's, again, a very difficult topic, as we've seen with the debate about free speech on social media. There's also the possibility of government pressure campaigns. Just last week, I think Russia forced Duolingo to remove, a very sort of oblique LGBTQ reference in the app, and so it holds that they would also want to restrict content in more immersive environments. And then, as has been referenced, there's the question of avatar representation for, to allow everyone to express themselves. I was just at the XR Access Symposium in New York last week, and one of the topics that came up was avatars and disability representation, which is still a work in progress for many platforms. And then we come to what we call in the paper controversial expression, which is expression that's often not protected in certain jurisdictions. So things like hate speech and harassment, which the online disinhibition effect, where you're kind of emboldened to behave poorly, and the idea that actions in XR don't have consequences, that's just a game, those combine to unfortunately increase harassment. There's also content and conduct moderation difficulties from just the sheer technological and logistical questions of how do you characterize these for automated moderation, how do you scale automated and human moderation. Unfortunately, there's also the potential for increased child sexual abuse material and abusive avatar deepfakes that could be even more harassing and damaging than the deepfakes that we're seeing today. So now that we've run through these potential benefits and risks to the freedoms of assembly and expression, we'll move on to how we should think about rights in XR more broadly, even beyond assembly and expression. And a couple of different governance models have been proposed that we talk about. One's the public metaverse owned by government, but theoretically this provides more accountability, but it's really only applies to VR metaverse platforms, not VR and AR more broadly. It also causes fragmented standards between platforms, as if you're teleporting between countries. Then there's the condominium model, which promises a decentralized ownership model, often through a decentralized autonomous organization or something like that. But one of the things that one of the realities that this overlooks is that the current development trends really favor established companies, and people haven't really been receptive to this kind of decentralized model in the past, as you see with Mastodon kind of struggling to find a foothold in the general population. And again, this really only applies to metaverse platforms instead of XR more broadly. So in the paper, we propose a novel way to think about fundamental rights in the virtual domain, and it combines ideas of embodiment, the public function doctrine, and fair procedure to give an idea of what and how much responsibility platforms have to uphold fundamental rights depending on the situation, by which I mean the XR product or experience at hand. And so embodiment, the basic idea is you're always embodied to some extent in a virtual experience, whether that's on just, on the traditional internet or in an immersive virtual environment. And as embodiment increases, so too does the potential impact of a fundamental right restriction or violation. And by that token, so too does the responsibility of a platform to make sure that they're protecting those rights. Then we talk about the public function doctrine, which emerged from a US Supreme Court case, Marsh v. Alabama, that was about a company town, and basically held that private companies, if they are taking on a state function, have to uphold constitutional rights as if, just as a state would. And we're not trying to transpose this US court ruling onto other jurisdictions, but just drawing some of the ideas from it, which is basically the idea that a company or a private organization should have to should take on the responsibilities of a state to protect fundamental rights in specific situations. And from say like a VR game, which may provide a very limited platform to expression, to a metaverse platform that's more of an all-encompassing ecosystem for expression, assembly, other fundamental rights. There's different levels of platform responsibility there. And then we bring in the idea of fair procedure, which is basically the idea that a private organization has to provide a kind of rudimentary due process during significant enforcement action. So canceling someone's health insurance is, I think, one of the prototypical examples, or say disciplinary action in VR, suspending, banning an account. And so we think that this provides a guide for approaching content and conduct moderation and user protection for a really diverse user base of XR. You've got embodiment, which helps identify the impact that the possible impact on a user. The public function doctrine helps outline the amount of power and responsibility a platform has. And then fair procedure gives you an idea of sort of an oversight mechanism and responsibility procedure. And we think that this is important because as immersive technology continues to grow, as XR becomes more popular, you're really putting a big responsibility on platforms, and they and users deserve a guide for how to protect fundamental rights. And we also think that this model could extend because it takes a spectrum-based approach to embodiment and to the public function doctrine. It can extend beyond just XR technologies to non-immersive platforms and provide a more sort of cohesive model of platform governance. And because online environments and XR environments, the UN has acknowledged, are important places to exercise fundamental rights, and we need to make sure that those rights are protected and promoted. So thank you all very much, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Amy. So interesting, especially how we address harassment. That's a very interesting topic. Our next presenter will be Anselm KÜSTERS. Anselm is the division head of Digitalisation at the Center of European Policy in Berlin, and his paper is titled A Tale of Two Metaverses, Assessing the EU's Influence on Standard Setting in Virtual Worlds. So, Anselm, the floor is yours.
I have like 20 extra slides, so just keep tapping.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. As you can see from the title of my paper, I deal with standard setting in virtual worlds, which is a quite technical topic that was, for me at least, difficult to write, and it's even more difficult to summarize it in 10 minutes. So when I was thinking about this presentation, I thought it would be good to relate it to the topic of this panel, which is Metaverse Governance. And the best way to tease the paper and connect it to this topic is, I think, from the perspective of critical technology studies, which is a literature that has the basic assumption that technology is a powerful driver of societal change. And I think that's an assumption we probably all can share, and that probably will also hold true for the metaverse. But there are, of course, different ways how we can think about this relationship between technology and society. And especially the older literature had this argument that technology is something autonomous, that is not subject really to human control, but evolves according to its own laws and rules. And that's a narrative that's still quite strong today in some media reports and in companies that seek investment. We can probably see it also in the debate about AI at the moment, where some newspapers like to link it to something very exponential, self-learning, autonomous, that we can only just prohibit or just let happen. And we can summarize this view as technological determinism. However, most of the current literature, I would say, takes a different approach and basically argues it's not so much technology itself, but the way it is embedded in society. So the social and economic system in which we embed technology. That's quite a popular and important view, and also a correct counterbalance, I would argue. But maybe it has been a bit overplayed. We see, for instance, in the US at the moment, there's a very interesting debate about a new Ludism. If we basically have to think again like the Ludists in the 19th century about the Industrial Revolution, whether it's the economic system, capitalism, that needs to be changed. And that somehow redirects the view towards certain persons, towards certain companies instead of the technology. And while I think this is an important perspective, I think when talking about metaverse governance, we really have to get back to this older view and talking about technology itself, because it basically has, in contrast to the social determinism of technology view, important repercussions for how we conceptualize the metaverse. Basically, we can think about this older view as thinking about technological arrangement as forms of orders, meaning the technology itself that we choose at the very beginning of a new evolution has certain political and social repercussions. And I'm not the first person to think that. There is a very famous article from Langton Winner from 1980 already, who asked the question, does artifacts have politics? And with artifacts he meant technology, and the famous example he gave was these bridges on Long Island that were on purpose built quite low so that you could not commute there with public buses, and you could exclude some marginalized populations, and only richer peoples with cars could travel there. So if we assume, again, that these technological arrangements that we choose early on when developing the metaverse have some political and social repercussions, it becomes crucial how to think and frame the metaverse. And if we assume this theory of technological politics, I was quite worried when I was reading some of the documents released with the EU initiative on virtual worlds, because we often find here a vision of metaverses in plural. Thierry Breton talked a lot about private metaverse spaces. We have this narrative about virtual worlds instead of the metaverse. And many startups and companies that I talk to, and also researchers, are now worried that this will mean we will have a vision, a future in the EU of many isolated individual worlds that sometimes might be interoperable, but sometimes not. And some of them might align with EU values and others not. And then we might end up in a situation where we have an EU Metaverse Act that only allows for those worlds aligning with EU values and excluding the others. And for me, this was a bit surprising to see this focus on metaverses in the plural, because it contrasts with the view of the metaverse I know from the literature, which is basically the metaverse as the successor to the internet. So one truly unified metaverse, universal metaverse based on joint standards. So in short, a metaverse as singular. So which of those two visions should the EU choose if we, again, have this theory of technological politics in mind? And in the paper, I go in some detail, and I basically warn of this vision of having several independent virtual worlds, each with its own standards and rules, because I think it will lead to a system where we repeat mistakes of the past we have seen in social media. We will end up maybe with closed ecosystem and gatekeepers, because if each of these worlds will have their own standards and rules, we might see again the same factors leading to winner-take-all markets that we have already observed over the past decade, namely economies of scale, strong user brands, direct and indirect networks effects, also AI coming up now, and high switching costs and lock-in effects. and that will lead to risks for EU citizens, to their freedom, to the state of competition in the internal market, but also to social and political dangers. In contrast, I argue in my paper that having this vision of one truly universal metaverse might be particularly helpful from the European perspective, because we have many small and medium-sized enterprises in the EU, we have a strong cultural sector, and they might profit from having access to one centralized metaverse without having new strategic dependencies. And the factors to bring this about would be interoperability, of course, but also, I think, early antitrust enforcement, and I'm thinking especially about merger control, and then, of course, technical standardization, which is then the main subject of the second half of my paper. And if we increase these factors, I argue there might be a chance that we can preserve consumer freedom and competition in the EU. So if we choose this vision, the obvious question that follows up is, of course, which standards exactly should be supported by the EU, because there are a lot of demands for joint standards, but it's often very general. So in the paper, I go through the technology stack, starting from the technological infrastructure, right up until the user experience, and I try to classify and prioritize a bit. And I don't have the time to go here in details, but the ones I think should be prioritized are put here in bold on the slide. And in the paper, I show that most of them that are really crucial are related to the technological infrastructure, such as metaverse-related web protocols, standards for 3D rendering, industry data sharing, whereas the standards related to the creator economy and user experience are more likely to emerge from market-driven processes. And I just want to make two general points here. The first thing I found out is there's really no free lunch. Having joint standards is not a free lunch. It might have detrimental effects for innovation, so we really have to prioritize and not just call for joint standards for everything. And the second point is that we really have to prioritize the technological infrastructure and try to avoid to already embed certain ethical values right from the beginning, because that might make it harder to really reach international agreement on these standards, and we might end up in a situation where we only try to replicate the Brussels effect, but really end up with certain disintegrated virtual worlds. And I make finally on this last slide some recommendations for increasing the EU influence when prioritizing certain standards. That's of course a $1 million question, but I make some general recommendations. The most important one probably being that we should not disconnect this technology element to the connectivity packages, but interact it more closely with the Virtual Worlds initiative and deal more closely with the standard setting organizations and initiatives that already exist in this space. We should also clarify the division of labor within the EU, and we should simplify language, so drop the Web 4.0 talk and the virtual worlds and just focus on one metaverse as singular. And finally, we also have to step up strategic public investments related to technical standards proposals. And with this, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anselm. So, one metaverse or multiple metaverses? That's a good question. All right, so now we're going to move forward for our next presenter. That will be online. We are getting ready right now. He's a Faith OBAFEMI, researcher and privacy policy technician at Queen's University, Belfast. And we will hear about his paper. There she is. Perfect. And she will present regulating data access and inquiry into the implications and implementation of Section 40 of the Digital Services Act in the Metaverse. So, Faith, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. Thanks for the introduction. So today I'm going to be talking about data access in the Metaverse with a focus on the Digital Services Act. The key research question in my paper happens to be, does the DSA apply to the Metaverse? And because of time, I'm going to skip the definition slides because I'm sure most of us already know what the metaverse is. Since this paper is focusing on data access, let's take a look at some types of data that can be generated in the metaverse. Most of us may be familiar with the first two, user data and content experience data, but might not be familiar with the rest. And there are some interesting data types like the platform and infrastructure data, examples like log files and spatial data, and also security and privacy data. I found that interesting, examples like encryption keys, passphrase, and mnemonic phrase. Okay, before I go to an analysis of Article 40, let's have an overview of the DSA. Before the DSA, usually researchers have to use any available means like web scraping and hope they don't get sued. So that was a reactive approach, but the DSA then introduced a proactive approach where researchers can, through the DSC, that's the Digital Services Coordinator, make a request for data access. Application of the DSA is extraterritorial because so long as the Information Society services are rendered to EU residents, the Act is going to apply. The Act also designated some very large online platforms and very large online search engines, which are those who have 45 million monthly average users. So these designated platforms have additional obligations under the Act. Then for violations, the Act could fine a platform up to 6% of its annual turnover. The Act adopted a co-regulatory framework with the European Commission and the national authorities called Digital Services Coordinators. At the time of writing this paper, 6 of the 27 member states are yet to either appoint or empower a DSA. Okay, now for an analysis of Article 40 of the DSA and its application to the metaverse, I will then try to answer the key research question: does the DSA apply to the metaverse? A look at Article 3, which contains definitions in the Act. We can see that Article 3, paragraph I, defines online platforms as a hosting service that, at the request of the recipient of the service, stores or disseminates information to the public. An example that comes to mind here would be Fortnite hosting Travis Scott's virtual concert. A look at Article 3G also defines intermediary service as a mere conduit service, which we can consider as transmission of data or information. So this means a metaverse platform that allows on-chain transactions could come under this definition. Also, intermediary service could mean a caching service, which is basically a temporary storage. So a metaverse platform that allows the creation of avatars or the creation of crypto wallets would fall under this definition. And lastly, an intermediary service could also mean a hosting service. And the definition of online platforms in Article 301 covers hosting service already. Now, while analyzing Article 40, I found that there were 3 instances of access to data provided under Article 40. And this table simply summarizes this access to data. There is one in Article 40, paragraph 1, that is given to the Digital Service Coordinator or the European Commission with the purpose of monitoring, with the purpose of monitoring and assessment of compliance. And the type of data that is given wasn't specified, so it's not clear whether the DSC or the European Commission will get access to private or public data. And also, it wasn't specified whether the results of maybe a research conducted using the access to data needs to be freely available or paywall. A second instance, which this paper mostly focuses on, is Article 44. And the purpose for this is to give researchers access to data who are conducting research on systemic risks and in the use of very large online platforms and very large online search engines. And the researchers who get this access need to be vetted researchers. And the type of data they can access is private. And it is mandatory that results of research based on this access to data needs to be provided free of charge. Then the third instance of access to data provided in Article 40 is in Article 40.12, which gives, which seems to be a broader access and given to literally any researcher who is affiliated to a non-profit and meets other conditions in Article 48. But I think this particular instance seems to be much more broader than that given in Article 44. And also the type of data that is access is given to here is public data, but it wasn't specified whether the results must be free of charge or could be paywalled. Okay, like I mentioned, the key, only Article 44 instance of data access seems to have provided a process that is laid down in the Act, and I simply paraphrase this process into 5 steps, where the initial one is ensuring that the researcher meets the conditions, and then the researcher makes a formal request through the DSC, and then the platform has the opportunity to amend this request, and then if all goes well, the researcher gets the access, and lastly, there is termination of access when the researcher no longer meets the conditions that have been provided. Of course, there are some implementation challenges with this act, mostly because it's new and only came into force February 17, but in terms of legal considerations, the top challenge is user content. Currently, there is debates around whether the initial consent that is given is sufficient or there is going to be a need to always collect consent, especially considering that in the metaverse, data collection can be persistent. Then there is not maybe a challenge, but a consideration is that though platforms have little rooms to refuse a data request, but they can invoke the confidential information exception, which means that where the data is sensitive or trade secret or intellectual property, they can choose not to share that data. Then another legal consideration is rapid obsolescence. And this basically means that because of how fast-paced technological developments are, it's easy for most laws to become obsolete within a short time. But I think a way to handle this challenge would be drafting laws that are tech agnostic, so that even in future developments and future innovations, those laws will still continue to apply. Then the technical challenges when it comes to implementation would be with respect to data interoperability. We have different standards and protocols under the tech stack behind the metaverse, and so it's going to be difficult to try to move data from one platform to another. And there's also the technical challenge of scalability, because now that data is being collected literally persistently, and there is also the availability of big data, it could be difficult to handle scalability. So some recommendations were made in the paper, mostly relating to privacy enhancing technologies, and this is because it's necessary to balance the interest of privacy of data subjects and also try to balance the benefits that comes from access to data, which is researching systemic needs and ensuring transparency or addressing public interest needs. And also, since this is a new legislation that is still just came into force in February, there is still need for legal clarity on a lot of issues. Like I mentioned earlier, only the instance of data access in Article 44 has a laid-down procedure. There does not seem to be any procedure for the other instances of data access. So there is going to be a need for more clarity on how all of these are going to operate in practice. So, in conclusion, Article 40 provides for 3 instances of access to data. And like I already explained, some of the definition in Article 3 could bring the metaverse under operation. So it simply means that Article 40 and the DSA are going to apply to metaverse platforms too. And as we expect upcoming delegated regulation, we hope that those are going to bring more clarity and help to ease enforcement. And because the metaverse is an evolution that keeps developing, this is going to continue to be a continuous effort, but we are sure that all of this are going to help bring more transparency to the metaverse, which is the core aim and focus of the Digital Services Act. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or send me a message.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Faith. Thanks a lot. She pointed out pretty interesting points about data acquisition. So now we move to our next presenter. She's Nataliia MAZARAKI. She's from the State University of Trade and Economics in Ukraine and the Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition. Her paper is Setting the Standards for Alternative Dispute Resolution, ADR, in the Metaverse. So Nataliia, the floor is yours.
Thanks for presentation. Thanks for having me here. And I opted for this topic as I deemed it is under research and underdeveloped in the metaverses in general. First of all, when we talk about the dispute resolution in metaverses, first we should bear in mind that there are different types of disputes, and different types of disputes demand different methods of dispute resolution. I would talk about how the metaverses provide for dispute resolutions in their terms and conditions. I would talk that their model is absolutely market-driven, not user-centric, no rights-driven. And this is an issue for trust and further development of metaverses. I will talk about that the arbitration chosen as the main outsourced dispute resolution method by metaverse platforms is really deficient and limited. And then I would turn to the issues that online dispute resolution, as in general dispute resolution standards, practices, ethical considerations are developing under the umbrella of different organizations, whether United Nations or some private dispute resolution standards. And then I would talk about, so what do we expect from dispute resolution methods in order to, as the chair goes for responsible development of the metaverse. So under the term of metaverse-related disputes come to our minds a wide range of disputes, and we need to classify them, and they are classified in real world also, in order to understand what are the nature of the parties, what their legal status, what is the power imbalance. The power imbalance impacts a lot on dispute resolution. Then we should talk about the nature of disputed relations. Are there intellectual property disputes, land disputes, investment disputes, or something else? then we should bear in mind that disputes range in their value, and low-cost value disputes do not demand high-cost, lengthy, difficult resolution. And then if we talk about metaverse-related disputes, we should think how the metaverse world is connected with the real world. And there could be also certain specific types of disputes. For example, when a metaverse platform meets the demands from public bodies on regulations or something like that. If you look through the terms and conditions of metaverse platforms, we would find big similarities. First, the stages are as follows. All of them provide for some initial consultations. There is no much details of how they would be convened, who will be from the part of the metaverse platforms, but normally I presume this for customer support services, and the terms and conditions normally limit this stage up to 30 days. Then all metaverse platforms opt for outsourcing dispute resolution, and they provide for arbitration. Those metaverse platforms who are based in US, they say, let's go to the JAMS arbitration service. The biggest one in the US is really a very reputable one with a large roster of neutrals. However, all these reputation come to other side. This coin have different sides, and I will talk about this. Some decentralized metaverse platform, for example, opted for Panama as arbitration seat in International Chamber of Commerce rules. So what we see that users are bound to high cost yet reputable arbitration. Metaverse platforms try to limit their liability as much as possible. And they try to avoid class action. Notably, all terms and conditions provide a clause that users are bound not to resort to class action and to stand for dispute resolution on their own. This is a trend that is happening in our world now, and US courts are now dealing with this issue, whether it is are there any rights compliance with these clauses or not. Then some platforms say about the limited possibility of court education, for example, for intellectual property disputes, which seems quite reasonable. And some, not many, but some metaverse platforms provide for EU ODR consumer dispute resolution for the EU users. And this Fortnite, for example, provides for such dispute resolution, and I would say in generally my comparison led to the conclusion that the Fortnite is the most user-friendly dispute resolution clauses among others. So, arbitration for metaverse-related disputes is quite reasonable from the point of platform, I would say. And however, one cannot say it's a bad option, it's a good option. It is as it is, but we could discuss or what is good and what is wrong. And these approaches vary as we talk about the interests of platforms. Either we talk about the interests of users. JAMS Arbitration Center, as I have said, yes, it is very big, very famous, very good. It has a wide roster of neutrals. I even found one neutral who said that he is an expert in metaverse disputes. They have a range of practices that are related to metaverse. That's, for example, blockchain. There is intellectual property, entertainment, media. So it's really easy and possible to find a neutral who is suited and ready to arbitrate the metaverse-related dispute. In literature concerning the dispute resolution, the expertise of a neutral is deemed to be a very important thing because it leads to the trust of disputants, it leads to a fair, reasonable, and efficient resolution. Why arbitration is good? For example, first of all, for enforceability of arbitral awards and the New York Convention, and there is growing literature on limitations of arbitration for metaverse disputes, and normally the limits are not so extensive or decisive that we could say that arbitration is not good for these metaverse disputes. Almost all arbitration centers have experience, standards and rules for online arbitration proceedings, and this also available feature for this, and arbitration is fast. But fast for whom, and comparing with what? Normally, I found the statistics that, for example, for JAMS Arbitration Center, the average time of dispute resolution of arbitration is 12 months. For a user, whether it is really fast or not. But if we compare to court adjudication, yes, really fast. However, we could not just compare to court adjudication. Court adjudication is really limited, is more limited for metaverse dispute resolution as arbitration. And confidentiality. You see on this slide the confidentiality appears twice, as a pro and as a con of arbitration. Normally for commercial disputes, confidentiality, I will try to master this word, is really important because of reputation, first of all, and why it is a con for metaverse-related disputes. I wonder this, in general, it's a deficiency. Metaverse are developing, and we should also learn from the practice. If practice is closed, what can we learn from? Then we have only platforms who would have access to some data, what disputes are here, what are happening, how to deal with them, how to prevent from them, and the public interest, I would say, user interest is quite limited in this aspect. So arbitration, as I see, is a really disputable option for dispute resolution of metaverse-related disputes. So what else? We have a range spectrum of dispute resolution methods, starting from negotiations, and on the other end is the court adjudication. The practice of different jurisdictions has developed a really good range what can be used as mediation, early neutral evaluation, mediation, arbitration, mediation, and many others. So expert advice, what should be chosen for the metaverse-related disputes? I would answer this question telling that we first should talk about some standards. What are we achieving for? And what can we learn from the real world? From the real world, not to spend much time, I see that you are watching me. So we have valuable developments by National Center for Technology Dispute Resolution that is in US, and you see the renewed ODR standards which provide for certain criteria. And also, I would say that United Nations criteria are also valuable. These are for business and human rights related disputes. So here we could learn how to make dispute resolution of metaverse related disputes more human-centered, more rights-driven. That's why, as I have said, a source of continuous learning, rights compatibility, transparency should be an issue. Despite the arbitration, centers provide for arbitration rules and guidelines for users, for disputants. It is not enough for an emerging sphere of dispute resolution. So in order to say what do different parties want from dispute resolution in metaverse? Users want for access to justice, efficient and fairly dispute resolution, clear understanding and transparency of this dispute resolution, and that the dispute resolution would be responsive to their context. For example, decentralized provides for Panama arbitration, so we could not say that it's universally accepted. What I missed in my speech is that there are other options of outsourcing dispute resolution with different platforms like Kleros, who provide mostly blockchain dispute resolution. But what they lack first of all due process. They lack fairness, efficiency, so they have even more cons than arbitration. Then we should think, okay, what do platforms want? Yes, they impose the rules of dispute resolution and terms and conditions. They have the power to do so. They have the bargaining power to do so. However, they are not alone, and they should meet the expectations of users in order to develop, in order to build trust, to have more investments. They need dispute resolution so responsive, so to understand their users more and prevent disputes and minimize adjudication. However, it is already in terms and conditions. And what do we want from dispute resolution on metaverse platforms? First of all, if I took the surveys, who are the users of metaverse? It's a future generation. You started with your children. Yes, this the generation who is engaged and would be more engaged in dispute resolution, and we should build the culture of amicable dispute resolution already there. And we already see that arbitration centers, court proceedings are step-by-step engaged in online proceedings, VR proceedings, metaverse proceedings, and I believe that Metaverse dispute resolution could teach us how to enhance dispute resolution in real world. And my goal was to set some criteria and effectiveness criteria for dispute resolution. And you see them on the slide, and I touched some of them already in my speech, and I would be ready to answer your questions and to please our moderator. Thanks for attention.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Nataliia, you point out pretty interesting points. Now we are going more forward to our last presenter. She's Stella Meyer. She's a research associate and project manager at the Lisbon Council, and she will introduce us to her paper, Openverse, supporting the emergence of open, human-centric virtual worlds. Stella, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's actually not a paper, it's a project. So let's see how it goes. Thanks so much for having me. I work at the Lisbon Council, which is actually based in Brussels and not in Lisbon. And I work on digital and tech policy. And so one of the projects that I work on is Openverse, and I work on the policy side of it. So if you have very technical questions, I will point you to the right person, but I will not be able to answer them. So I'll give you a brief overview and then zoom in on some of the aspects that I think might be most relevant for you. First of all, a quick overview. So Openverse stands for Open and Co-Created Virtual Worlds. It's a Horizon project running for 3 years. Kickoff was in November last year, so it just started basically. We're 12 partners from 5 different countries, and the Lisbon Council is coordinator of the project. Here you have an overview of the partners involved, but as you will see later on, there are a lot more partners engaged. In a nutshell, it's about establishing a knowledge base to foster open, transparent, inclusive, competitive, and ethically and environmentally responsible virtual worlds. So it's quite ambitious, strong focus on values and the human. And the challenges hereby are to enable accessibility, freedom, and control for the user, obviously, to make sure that all the virtual worlds are interoperable, respect privacy, and are secure. And then lastly, to foster innovation, creativity, and social benefits. And so again, for all of these challenges, the human is at the center, and we're trying to build the world around the human, basically. So the needs and the values that we think are most important. And we've heard this before, to have more collaboration between developers and end users. Here you have an overview of the work plan. I have a breakdown that is more readable. But basically what I want to show you here is that most of the tasks run throughout the entirety of the project, and the findings that we have in the beginning are constantly incorporated and built on. So it is really a constant work in progress. So few tasks have a definite endpoint. Here's the reader-friendly version. So there are 7 work strands, basically. And again, you can see strong focus on co-creation, collaboration, community building, creating synergies. So that is one big pillar of the project, but also creation of meaningful and tangible results. So there is a lot of research, a lot of case studies, working a lot with external stakeholders, and creating very tangible, exploitable assets. So here you have a list of the most specific ones, but basically the important, or not the important one, but the main outcome is going to be the Openverse Observatory, which is number 2. And all of the other points feed into the observatory, which has different elements. I mentioned some of them before. So you have case studies. I think there are at least 30 case studies ongoing right now. We have a marketplace of opportunities, which is basically research into market value chains, future outlook, understanding how immersive technologies will impact certain sectors and which sectors might be most impacted by them, So think gaming, education, health. And all of these findings, research, interviews with experts are going to, be put into reports. We have the handbook that you saw before. And all of these elements are put together and form this Openverse Observatory, which is basically the knowledge base that I mentioned at the beginning. So the core of the project. And the backbone of all of this is the Openverse taxonomy, which you can see on the right in this beautiful graph. And partners have already come up with the taxonomy, and they're working on the marketplace right now. And the observatory is implemented in several iterations. So the first iteration is actually due in July, and will contain the marketplace of opportunities and the first case studies. And then there are going to be more and more iterations with more content, and at the end of the project, you basically have the entire observatory. And the consortium is actually thinking, because it's a three-year project, to use this knowledge base as kind of the starting point to maybe start a think tank or some sort of, continuity of the project. Another big pillar is the Openverse Ecosystem Task Force, because there is so much co-creation involved in the project, and we need input from anyone working on any aspect of immersive technologies or virtual worlds. The consortium launched the Openverse Ecosystem Task Force, which allows partners to collaborate with external stakeholders. And the main objective here is to coordinate activities and to foster that knowledge exchange and mutual learning. So primary objective and expected outcome is the co-creation of a technological framework that feeds into all of the other aspects that are related to virtual worlds. But of course, the task force is going to also support other work strands. Again, you've seen it before. Most tasks involve some sort of co-creation or research across sectors and stakeholders. So here again, you have the expected outcomes and possibilities for joint publications. I would say most important are the technical and infrastructure framework, and also the industry standards, which are a big deliverable at the end of the project as well, and part of the observatory. Here you see the current task force members. The task force was launched a few weeks ago with 8 members, but we're constantly expanding the task force, again, because we want to have as many different perspectives as possible represented. So if you want to learn more, you can check out the website, you can ask me, or you just send an email to the consortium. And yeah, we're continuously expanding the task force, and we're always happy to have new people join. Yeah, and in terms of outlook, what to expect next, I already said it. At the end of July, we're going to have the first iteration of the observatory. And then we have some big deliverables at the end of the year. So we have the first policy brief, we have a major community event and a foresight event. Task force work is ongoing. And there are a lot of webinars, networking activities, co-creation activities that are open. And we really want people to join and contribute. So I suggest you follow us on social media, where you will hear about them first. And join if you can. We really welcome anyone, and we value different perspectives. Thanks a lot.